All right, we'll go ahead and call to order the special board meeting of the Des Moines Waterworks Utility for Tuesday, September 12th. This is a special board meeting outside of our usual monthly meetings in which we are looking to review the Regional 28E agreement, and I believe this is the third draft that we're looking at and examining those pieces of the document that have been changed since our last review in order to be able to move this forward with our partners and bring us closer to a conclusion with this effort that many have been working tirelessly on for a very long time. So with that, I guess the first question here is whether or not we want to hold a closed session.
Andrew, I think our plan is to review the document in open session and review the changes. And you've already mentioned, but just to confirm, our plan is to focus on things that have changed between draft 2 and draft 3. Rick is going to walk us through those changes. Really, nothing in the specific changes that needs to be handled in closed session. But if any member of the board at some point after a review of the changes wishes to request legal advice or talk about something that is strategic, we would have the opportunity to go in closed session. But that's not our plan at the outset, if that's okay.
I think that makes perfect sense, the way that you've outlined it. But for just all of our sake of reminding us, if you or Rick could share what exactly is preferred to be talked in closed sessions, or what institutes that type of request.
Sure. I don't expect we're going to get into anything that involves legal advice scenario, or that involves anything that's not kind of well understood by people we've been working with. So nothing about the second draft or the third draft. I mean, it's pending, and it's particularly secret or confidential. Happy to have this discussion session. Absent something that comes out that I'm personally not expecting. We'll know what we see it.
Okay. With that, then I will turn it to Rick then to walk us through. Or
I think I've said what I need to, and we can hand it to Rick to walk us through the changes.
Okay. Everybody has the red line version of the master draft. Amy Taylor's been compiling as we go with changes, cumulative character, as a result of comments received from a gamut of potential participants, and frankly a lot of pick and shovel work that the representatives of Des Moines, West Des Moines, and Urbandale have been doing to get everything complete and everything right in what we're trying to achieve the CIWW 28 arrangement. That said, there are a lot of changes, but I don't think there are any major structural and conceptual. This is a different deal than we've been talking about all these many years. I want to talk at the outset about two conceptual categories of changes, and rather than starting at page 1 and going from 1 to page 140 at the end, I'd like to talk about it conceptually, because I think that's the easiest way to grasp what we've done. And the first category of changes that I want to talk about are those that reflect the accommodation and needs of the potential rural water district members, and the needs of certain members who would have potentially come into conflict with rural water districts, and we want to get those things taken care of as a prelude to entering into this agreement. That said, there are quite a number of changes and a few new schedules that recognize that the rural water districts are different in the respect that they operate partially within the Des Moines metro area and partly outside, in some cases way outside the metro area. And so in order to accommodate and reflect that, we have drafted in consultation with them exceptions to the rule of exclusivity. The general concept of CIWW is that it will be the exclusive wholesale water supplier to the metro area. However, to the extent they're way outside the metro area, they want to have the right to get their water from other more practical sources. And frankly, CIWW doesn't want to undertake to supply water outside the metro area because that would strain the physical capacities and expected capacities to do that. So there are some schedules that create a Des Moines service territory for the rural water districts, and which there are text provisions that say they don't have to take their water from the CIWW, nor the CIWW undertake to provide that service as an obligation of CIWW. In addition, they are listed in some schedules where they've reserved the right to have some total service agreements and wholesale agreements, just as Des Moines Waterworks does. It's been in the agreement from the jump. Additionally, there's been some good work between certain of the suburban potential member agencies and the rural water districts to resolve some things that divided them. They have some agreements pending, or they've entered into some agreements. Those agreements are going to be recognized and acknowledged as outside of this agreement, but so no one makes the mistake in believing that you can't have those agreements outside. Those agreements are going to be listed in the schedule. Last category of rural water district change is rural water districts had some concerns about the water shortage plan, things like exceptions for animal health and some other things. And so the water shortage plan has been modified to accommodate their needs. I think, Ted, that's the only changes to the water shortage plan.
That's correct, related to serving livestock.
All right, let me pause then and ask if anyone has any questions about these things made to accommodate and resolve issues with the rural water districts.
I didn't understand what you said about. I understand that the rural water districts have territory outside of the Central Iowa Water Works. You said that part of their territory will be designated as within. I don't understand how you determine their demand going forward without some kind of designation to understand what they're gonna need, if that water's not being used elsewhere. You need to talk about how that.
I think the plan is to define a map, which is the area basically currently served with Des Moines water, and perpetuate that. And they will continue to get all of their needs for Des Moines area water as they have now. But there are certain areas that go beyond that where they reserve the right to get it elsewhere. And we coupled that with a limitation that we might serve outside that area, but there's no pre-existing CIWW obligation to serve beyond what are defined in the metro territories.
Is that defined as existing boundaries or with fluctuation?
I think the existing boundaries.
Existing customers is the way we defined it. So they're gonna give us a map that shows their existing customers. We moved away from this concept of service territory because it's more general, it's more broad, it's less defined. So give us a map that shows your existing service area, the existing customers that you serve and what area they are in. And so that will be their initial service area. And then if they want to expand that. They want to grow that, they want to move into other areas, they have to get approval from the tech committee. This is the way it's stated. So the tech committee will review that, make sure that we have the capacity. They'll have to have the capacity. They'll have to own the capacity as the rural water district. And then the tech committee will review that. But by the same token, they also are reserving the right to come to us and say, look, we're growing. We don't have the capacity to serve our whole growth area. So we want to shrink the area that we serve from Central Iowa Waterworks. We want to serve that from somewhere else so that we can use our allocated capacity to serve more customers in our smaller shrunken area. They also have to get permission to do that. And that's all important because of the geographic expanse, multiple counties that they cover and other communities that may someday grow and may need more water. It's just a flexibility for the future thing, but it's tied to review and approval by the technical committee.
Other question, if we're done with that, goes to the agreements, and I assume it's
Senior and Warren.
and more. Okay, as to how that's gonna work, so it gets away from what we were trying to do before, what they wanted to do, which was to have a standard within. And it goes to agreements, and we're fairly sure that they're going to be able to reach agreement.
Well,
I don't know.
my certainty is very secondhand.
Yeah.
But, what I understand to be the case is they have agreements in place. Both the rural districts and suburban customers are satisfied with it, and those have been reduced to written agreements of some kind, and those written agreements are going to be listed in the schedule as in place and not superseded by. So resolution outside of the CIWW agreement, but refer to therein to make sure everybody understands it's binding.
Which is what we want. We wanted it to be outside.
The degree of risk to that being completed, I couldn't tell.
But did you hear Urbandale does have that agreement? I knew West Des Moines did. I had not heard if it had been completed for them.
Neither one of them have been signed, is my understanding. They've come to
Okay.
terms. Both have come to terms, is our understanding.
Yeah,
And they
well,
expect them to be executed in October. Is my understanding. So it'd be before this.
no one has suggested in the meetings that happen lately that that's not gonna come to completion.
Good.
But we haven't been directly involved, so it's hard for us to get assurance.
But it's being decided outside of our agreement, which was our intent.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody needs to be happy with what they've done. I think before they're voting to sign up for things. Led to believe that that's all good. I guess as far as I can say, based on what information we should.
My question is regarding the wholesale customers. And I believe you said that they will be able to retain those. Is there an expiration on those? Like how we, if I remember correctly, we're negotiating that we would not renew our wholesale. No, am I getting mixed up? Renew our wholesale. But
There's a couple of layers there, Andrea, and you're remembering correctly that existing wholesale customers of Des Moines Waterworks who have the opportunity to join Central Iowa Waterworks but decide not to. We have agreed not to renew those wholesale relationships. So, those would be West Des Moines, Clyde, Milwaukee, Urbandale. If they choose not to join, then part of the agreement is we're not going to continue to be their wholesale supplier after 2045. We're maintaining our toll service customers in perpetuity, Pleasant Hill, Windsor Heights. Now, so that's, you remember that correctly. When we get out into the western areas of Xenia's territory, there are small communities that have no opportunity to connect to the
Mhm.
regional system or the core network, if you will. And what Xenia is saying is, hey, someday if they want to become a customer of ours, is it okay if we serve them?
Mhm.
And we've said yes, but they've told us who those are. So there are 3 or 4 exactly, but they're in the agreement. Excuse me.
They're both attached as a list to the relevant schedules for wholesale customers and total service, which were previously negotiated as to how we want waterworks to be treated. So it's a kind of a parity thing.
Okay, thank you.
With that, I would go to the other big picture issue, which is asset transfer terms and details. And on this one, a lot of spade work has been done, that's reflected in the schedules. And it's schedule 4-6, schedule 13-1. And what was discovered in the process of sweating the details a little bit was that the specific circumstance of each category of asset that was originally listed in draft 2 made a big difference on how the asset transfer would be accomplished and what needed to be done about existing agreements and existing circumstances. And so Waterworks staff, I think primarily Ted and Amy, roll up their sleeves and they wrote a detailed summary of each of the asset categories. And from that, decisions were made about how assets would actually be transferred. In some cases, there will be quick claim deeds. In other cases, there will be assignments of easements. In other cases, there will be some new agreements put into place, possibly some new 2080 agreements between CIWW and others. And just a whole bunch of detail in there that led to some understanding that we should make a couple of other changes in the body of the agreement. And among those changes is a concept that some of the assets to be transferred are primarily water distribution assets, but also play significant water supply assets, but also play significant roles in water distribution, both in Des Moines Waterworks and for other customers. And there is a long evolution of a lot of these facilities that have both kinds of use. There are many agreements in place that govern the sharing of cost and maintenance and so on. And the basic decision was made, and it's now in the schedule to have CIWW assume the agreements and take the asset transfer subject to those agreements and assume those agreements. So that will perpetuate those relationships going forward. However, it was also recognized that in order to make the system work in the future the way it's worked in the past, there needed to be some guiding principles on how to pay for new such facilities and how there would be operation and maintenance shared for those based upon the benefits conferred and the use of the parties. And as a result, there is a new section in the body of the agreement about these kinds of facilities and a new schedule entitled Guiding Principles. It's heavily negotiated on how that will work going forward. And it conceptualizes what the future will look like with the CIWW going forward with respect to these kinds of hybrid type facilities. Ted, I missed something on that, of the hybrid guided principles.
You haven't missed anything, Rick, but I will say it's not as complicated as it sounds. You know, it's hard to put into words. But you know, we have facilities that are treatment plants that are clearly transferring, and they're, you know, they're interesting transferring the treatment plant, and we have, you know, water mains in Georgia Supply Parkway that are not transferring. Everybody understands that. But then we have a facility like the LP Moon pumping station that we currently own. There's no need for us to continue to own that under this regional model. There are agreements in place about who pays for the operation and maintenance of that facility. What we've said is we're just going to perpetuate that. We're going to keep those agreements. Ownership of that facility is going to transfer to Central Iowa Water. And the agreement that governs operation and maintenance, and who pays for the power, who pays for the chemicals, who pays for the new roof. That agreement is gonna transfer to CIWW. And then CIWW and the participants be the parties to that agreement instead of Des Moines Waterworks and Clyde and Lockheed. It facilitates moving forward with those joint use facilities in the new. It was important and it took a lot of effort to get it just right, but we got there. I think it's a good system.
So I have a question. So you talked about agreement as to operation and use maintenance. What about the compensation for the value of that asset
We get the compensation for the value,
for the whole thing?
yes. Appreciate the value.
Sure.
We look value.
Compensation comes because there's a book value for that asset
Yep.
on our books.
Yep.
That book value is going into the spreadsheet for asset transfer. A reasonably significant change that we made in looking at all these assets was some of them that we expected to retain title to and just grant CIWW easement. We switched over to a situation was going to be needed to CIWW. Because some of the participants were telling us they kind of insisted on deeding some assets, because they didn't want to keep any responsibility. And kind of take that attitude on some other assets like the traffic or the chain of lakes. So all of that's gonna go to CIWW. Off our books. Ted, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the rationale for that.
Well, I feel like I've talked to a number of members of the board about this already, but basically. The question became, does Des Moines Waterworks as the distribution utility that's supplying the city of Des Moines proper want to own and maintain a reservoir that is functionally a raw water source for a regional plant and be responsible for operation and maintenance of the dam and the outlet facilities and whatnot. And while we have some pride of ownership of that facility, when it came right down to it, we looked at it and said, that should really be a regional facility, regional asset. That's who gets the benefit from it. And that's who should own it and bear the cost of ownership. So it was determined that that should transfer. And that's the way that we have things set up in the agreement today.
How does the transfer, I'm looking at the floor treatment plant in particularly, how does the transfer of that asset in the structure and the transfer of the land work?
Well, what we put in this draft is Des Moines Waterworks will keep the land as its owner. There will be instruments put in place to grant the CIWW rights of use for the gallery, for the future building. Probably deed the buildings, the primary water distribution, deed the laboratory, some other things that were indistinct in the prior draft. And then there will be, one of the reasons in this is because there are some intrinsically distributive aspects of operation. And you see that particularly in the area inside the levee. That is mostly water production, but has other important water distribution facilities. So CIWW is going to get the rights it needs. One Waterworks will keep title. And then there will be ancillary agreements about who pays what going forward in the future, because that's going to have to be sorted out, particularly on things like the laboratory. Those instruments are described now in the schedule.
Mhm.
They aren't prepared yet. They'll have to be
Okay,
negotiated between the effective date of the agreement and the operation.
okay, so we are separating. I'm looking at a map, all of this that's happening there that is both that we would want to retain use and access to from what Central Iowa would be.
Yeah, I think we're actually in an 80-20 agreement of some kind, much like put in place for the park.
Sure.
All these conflicting,
Mhm.
not necessarily conflicting, all these different interests that need to be reconciled.
Right.
That's particularly distinct in the sewer treatment plant area. We've done a lot of work on the details of that, and it's reflected in the verbiage.
So then. Rafael is one of the, will be deeded to, Central Iowa Water Works and the Urbandale.
The Urbandale quarries, Yes.
Quarries are also.
yes,
Chain of Lake also. All those are gonna go.
yes.
The, I could talk all day about asset transfer, but I think I want to move on if we have questions. Kind of going to the front, cover page, you'll note, what we call the disclaimer has been rewritten. And basically, we've taken a little of the provisional, this is not yet finished kind of language out and replaced it with concept of this being the final draft, but it hasn't yet been adopted by anybody's board. So we're gonna publish this, or intend to publish it at the end of this week. It's gonna go out with this disclaimer, even though the board has not taken any formal action to join CMWW. That will come according to a schedule that's kind of being worked on right now. But I think the expectation is that this is gonna go out the end of the week, and then all of the governing bodies of the constituent founding member agencies are going to be asked to pass a resolution to set their final public hearing and their final board and the city council will need to approve the final form of payment, all looking toward completion by the end of January and hopefully by the end of December. Recognizing that might be, it might go as late as the end of January.
And just a little finer point there. When we send this out, our plan is to include a sample and example resolution that communities or boards could pass in November this year. So we're giving them time. Half of September, all of October, whatever part of November they need to have public meetings, ask questions, to do what they need to do. But we're asking them to pass a resolution in November, setting the date of a public hearing, either in December or January, when they would act on it. So that's sort of the concept of the next step is, here's the document, here's a resolution, do the document, ask any questions you may have your public meetings, and then pass this resolution, because we need to know who's in. Right. So that we can finalize the document that will then be approved in December and January by all the participants.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed if somebody's not in who we expect to be in, who the schedules.
I'll go through that timing again. You expect that if we want to get it done by December or January, when do we expect the resolutions?
In the month of November, we'll ask them to pass a resolution during the month of November at one of their regularly scheduled meetings, setting the date for the disposition of the actual agreement as January or February. And some of the communities will have.
December or June.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you.
Everybody's gonna have a public hearing for bond purposes, and many of us are gonna have a public hearing for asset transfer purposes, all of that will have to. Public hearings will have to be set. If we're gonna hold to the schedule.
But that's separate from having educational sessions or
Yes.
listening sessions or whatever.
Public hearings I'm talking about are the legally required public hearings before you issue bonds.
So all of the partners, potential partners pass their. In January, by January, they basically sign the agreement. CIWW comes to life when?
on its filing of the signed agreement with the Iowa Secretary of State.
The target date for that would be February.
February 1.
And then the board would be seated shortly thereafter, would be the hope.
There's an open question about when we're gonna ask people to appoint their board representatives. Not entirely sure if that's settled yet.
No, I think we want them to sign.
Right.
And then, because you can't appoint a board member to something that doesn't exist, or there's some question
Right.
about whether you
Right.
can
I
appoint a
understand.
board member to something that doesn't exist. And so we want everybody to sign, and that's my preference, is that we get everyone to sign, and then we tell them. We want to know who your board representative is going to be, your representatives in our case by. March 1st or something.
We're holding to an operational commencement and asset transfer date of January 1, 2020.
Okay.
It's hardwired in the agreement, although the board has the power to extend that. And it could happen. Depending upon. All the expertise getting approvals and consents.
They're gonna have to hire an executive director and so many things.
We need a couple of approvals from the federal government for this, so. Questions about asset transfer? Or I guess we'll pass that, another page. A late breaking change. This is something new that. It's just been prepared at the Monday meeting at the committee group. There are a couple of folks who have not been included in the opportunity to join DMWW. Come forward and say they would like to join. I refer specifically to the city of Van Meter and a rural group called the Iowa Regional Utilities Association. Those folks were not, as a practical matter, the same category as the people who are being committed to join as founding members. I think the consensus has emerged that it's just not feasible to get them into the organization, or even if it's appropriate that they join the organization just yet. But because they kind of put a stake in the ground when they say they'd like to be a member, it's appropriate that they be able to join at some future date without being charged the premium that is intended to be charged to folks who have the opportunity to join or choose not to. And so that's resulted in a new clause in Article 12, Section 3, and a new Schedule 12-3 in the agreement. There were some arguments about whether some people should be permitted now, things like that. This schedule resolves that. I think everybody's satisfaction has been discussed this before.
How did Van Meter and rural water or rural utilities hear about our work? I mean, I can assume how they heard, but that brought them forward. And are there others out there that are gonna say, well, we never knew I had an opportunity to come forward and get included at a later date?
I don't know how to answer that.
Right.
Ted can.
Well, I can answer how they heard. I mean, everyone in the water industry in Iowa knows. that we're doing this. We've been doing it for some time, as we've discussed. And so they became aware just through presentations that we've done, just
Mhm.
hearing about the process from us and from others. And they said, wow, that sounds great. We'd really like to be involved in that. Can we join? And this process really started all the way back in 2017 with our long range plan and projections of growth and projections of demand. It's a huge undertaking, and to try to add somebody in 5 years later is disruptive to the process. And so we basically just said no, but they have indicated, wow, we really would like that consideration, and can we get on the list of potential future members? And I guess that's how they know. Are there other entities that are going to come forward? I don't know, but they've certainly had the opportunity to become aware and to ask, and I will tell you this too, Andrea. In 2017, when we were doing the long range plan, or it's probably 2016, we went all of the communities around the metro. I'm talking about Mitchellville and Carlisle, and Winterset and Van Meter. Said, hey, do you want to be a part of this? And they said no. And so they're not.
Okay.
And now Van Meter is the only one who has subsequently come and said, you know what, we might
Okay.
like to be a part of it.
Just as long as we're not, we don't get this influx afterwards of saying, well, I didn't know I could be included on the wait list and not be charged a premium.
And as people change and personalities
Sure.
change and whatnot, that could happen. I'm not saying that
Right, but they've all had ample,
they've had the opportunity and they've said no at one time. And
Okay.
you have to draw the lines.
Did you say, Rick, there was a time period on that? Okay, no,
5 years.
5 years, thank you,
I didn't say there's a five.
but there's a 5-year period.
Just for those two entities.
They're the only ones who are kind of have stake in the ground. They're eligible for that.
Right, but I think the point that Andrea makes, that we didn't have a process. I mean, I know we said, well, we went and talked to them, they said no, and, but this thing has been evolving for a lot of years. And we didn't have a process, they just kind of came and then put something in, but I could see a community saying, I didn't know, I knew that you were doing it, but I didn't know that if you came, that provision would be made. Maybe when we put this draft out there and they see that, maybe they'll do
I mean,
it.
you had Newton come, and Newton it wasn't feasible for us to include.
That's the Central Iowa Utilities one.
Right.
They actually are connected to Newton and receive water. So you're exactly right. Central Iowa, or the Iowa Rural Utilities Association is the name they can find. And we said, it just isn't feasible, and it's too late. And so we said, but this is what we've offered, is we'll put you on the list. And if you, within 5 years, decide you actually do want to invest in a connection, we won't charge you this one piece. There's a little bit of a premium for people who join later, a little bit, millions of dollars. But we won't charge you that premium. That's the consideration we're giving to people who come and said, hey, we'd like it, but it really isn't feasible at this time.
This was a solution to the problem. There was some argument that it should be allowed in now. Big practical problems with that, and we didn't agree with that. We didn't want to do my father's.
I mean, but I think potentially you've got, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's justified, but the one that's out there to me is an Altoona. That has said no. But a year from now says, oh, we've rethought this and you gave a provision for these two, we want to be included in that provision. I think the answer is no. Because they were at the table and we negotiated with them quite a bit. So it would
We're
be,
still working with it too.
and absolutely, but I mean, if their ultimate answer is no, they can't say they didn't have the opportunity.
Right.
Van Meter can say they didn't have the opportunity.
Right.
The other one can say they didn't have the opportunity.
And that's all clearly documented.
Well, I think it's very clearly documented that Altoona has the opportunity to join. And everybody who has the opportunity to join, there are 13 agencies that have the opportunity to join. That is very clear. And now it's in the document that Van Meter and Iowa Rural Utilities Association came to us and said, hey, we'd like to join. And we said, no, but if you decide, if you're still interested, you can join within 5 years, we'll give you this one consideration.
And it's important because for an entity that joins after CIWW is formed, the rules are written about how an entity joins and what those costs are. And those are not something that CIWW can change easily.
I think that's true. I don't think they can.
Right? I mean, we did that purposely.
It's hardwired. Yeah.
Right, it's hardwired into the agreement. So I mean, hard, a CIWW board 3 years from now could say, oh, we'll let such and such in, even though they weren't on this process, but and waive this thing because it's hard work. That's why this provision is important.
It's an exception to the general.
Yep.
Sue, you've done it.
You mentioned that these two organizations came forward to a mini group. Who's that? Just so we know.
Someone within the micro group, Sue. Iowa Rural Utilities Association kind of met with me. More than once. And we talked amongst the group that's working on the West Des Moines. And Van Meter had some interactions with West Des Moines. So they were communicating with them directly. And then the West Des Moines communicated with us.
Kind of more our CEO level.
Yes.
Just didn't know if there was another group out.
I get confused between micro and mini.
Yeah.
Well, Diane and I knew nothing about it, so I wanted to make sure, it wasn't one of our breakfast meetings with John and Jim.
West Des Moines staff people carrying the ball for Van Meter. Till this solution is found, I don't think they reconcile themselves to the idea that they have then there's a bunch of new provisions and new details that I'd like to just go through quickly. First one is someone came forward and asked staff, what happens if we lose a major water customer and we've got these 5-year averages of max date demand and average demand that those affect our finances? What if we lose a customer? Can we get some relief if that occurs? And people thought about that. They thought, well, yeah, you ought to be able to petition the board and after technical committee review, have your numbers adjusted because you lost the customer. So that provision has been added. There is a provision that wasn't there before that allows the people who incurred substantial expenses, including waterworks, in the creation of CIWW to get expenses reimbursed. So there's a new provision for that reimbursement and a new schedule with lists of things that are eligible for reimbursement. There's some changes to the provisions for financing and the Saylorville expansion. There are some bond council requested changes to the public debt that's allocated. And there continue to be some bond council discussions about a few minor tweaks that we hope to get resolved before the end of the week. Get all of the bond council ever looked at this on the same page. There is a new provision that covers the issue of capital projects for which rates have been charged to the region and capital projects that have been budgeted, but for one reason or another haven't yet been completed, but they might have been completed. So those pending capital projects have been covered. So the capital costs of those and our rates, and those are listed in the schedule. And there'll be a financial adjustment where those pre-collected funds will be paid to CIWW. That amount will be added to the book value of the facilities for asset transfer purposes. And that resolved the ongoing problem in the negotiations. Anything more to say about that?
No, I think you stated it well. I'd be happy to answer questions. I think it's a fair way to approach. There was a question about Des Moines Waterworks reserves and what should we be turning over, and staff here felt, Des Moines Waterworks has taken on all the risk for the region. The ownership model is not shared. It has not been shared in the past, and so those are Des Moines Waterworks reserves. However, we did agree that to the extent that we have collected in rates, planned expenses for capital projects that we haven't completed yet, then we shouldn't just get to tuck those away in our reserves and benefit from them. So In this schedule, it's not an insignificant amount or this draft, it's about $9.6 million, I think, that we need to transfer to the region. That number will certainly change, within, 15 months or so, but, it is important to note that it is included in that asset transfer true up calculation, so we will get credit for our share. So it's really just as if the asset had been constructed and we were getting credit for it. So we think it's a fair resolution.
What happens to the priority of that asset being constructed? Is it now up to the discretion of CIWW as to whether or not they will make that improvement? Or is it still anticipated that it will get done?
From my perspective, and then I'll let maybe the engineers answer, but it would be part of our CIP, and these are projects that are part of our CIP. We list the CIP projects in a separate schedule, at least for the next couple of years in 2025, 2026. Those are considered pre-approved projects for the agreement. So these are important projects. I see the benefit in the region.
I think under the operating contract, we wouldn't have to construct those without further authority.
So for those other reserves that we end up keeping. There'll be a time after CIWW's formed where you're gonna come back to us, I would imagine, because. Des Moines Waterworks is then gonna adjust its need for reserves. I mean, that amount that we've been holding in reserves may be smaller. Because what we control here at Des Moines Waterworks, our assets may be smaller, so that's something you'll come back to after. Everything shakes out, and probably at the same time that you come to us with. We have this revenue that we've gotten from CIWW, and here's the plan, right? That's all kind of the
It'd
same
be
type
very
of,
important to have a plan to show our customers,
right?
here's what we're gonna do with it.
And you'll recommend at that time what the new reserve level should be and how
Correct.
that's allocated.
And I should be clear, there are a couple different reserves that we talk about in finance. One of those is board designated reserves. And that's, by board policy, we must have 3 months set aside. This doesn't do anything from that. So we will still have the same level of board designated reserve. This is cash that we are holding, waiting for that project to be completed. So it's really not taking anything away from our customers.
But my point being, there's that
Only
moment of realignment, you'll have revenue coming in, you're gonna have to present us with the plan about how to go forward. That all kind of comes at one time.
Move on to the next item. There's a new provision to avoid the problem of excess use shared facilities. It's become increasingly apparent that some of the transmission and pumping station assets can be overused by certain parties. And we've had a provision to put some discipline in that process so they don't do it. But if they do it, something new will be built and they'll be charged for it. So that's a new section 8D. That's tied back into the technical committee determinations.
Does that apply to non-members?
Well, this agreement governs only members, so someone who's not a member, we're gonna have to deal with that in a different way. That may occur. Some folks don't join. Some might have. There's a new provision to cover the possible voluntary transfer of allocated capacity among members. Recall that that's a provision that was in the master purchase capacity agreements, and there's nothing in this agreement that covered that eventuality, so it was decided that was the base we had to cover. There is a new section defining a term that was used throughout the draft 2 of joint capital projects. But it was decided it wasn't clear what a joint capital project was and what the rules governing it would be. So a new section has been added for that. And the importance of that is joint capital projects are things relating to water supply facilities that are 100% paid by CIWW, not split in this 91 line. Place for growth. That was made for expansion. In draft 2, it was assumed that there would be a period of operation for asset transfer. That went away. We no longer have that. Because we're not going to have this interim period, it's not feasible to set rates in this agreement. So we eliminated the provision that said these are what the rates are going to be. Rates will rather will have to be set by the government. Any questions? I'm going to do this pretty quick about those details.
I assume then the seated board will use the cost of service study that we.
Well, they will use the cost principles that are scheduled in the agreements. Those are heavily detailed.
Our cost of service study and then.
Yes, that's right. It don't have to be a cost of service study, but it'll have to be broader than ours. It'll have to cover everything.
Other producers.
Haven't thought about that detail, which Amy probably has.
We have a template already.
The couple of final details, some members were concerned about the wheeling clauses, so we added a reasonability standard on wheeling. The lawyers were worried about making sure the operating contracts are in place before asset transfer occurs, so we've added a couple of clauses that make it clear that no asset transfer can occur unless and until the operating contract for one waterworks was others. There are new provisions about dual use assets of operating contractors. This primarily relates to SCADA systems that control both distribution and water production. Those assets are now going to revert back to the operating contractor who uses them rather than being scattered to the use. That's all I've got on my notes is the important stuff. Ted, if I missed something, it's high on your list there.
No, you haven't. You've covered all of the things high on the list.
Amy? Questions? What, issues, problems, concerns, or are we on track to get this done?
So. I'm not gonna say a word about the right track.
I mean, the fact that we're getting through these, draft reviews and you can make it through all of the changes in 45 minutes, with questions being asked, to me makes it seem like we are definitely on the right track. The questions, the outstanding issues, that list seems to get smaller and smaller. And those items that need to be brought to our attention aren't causing the conflict or the discussion that they once were. So thank you all for your expertise and your dedication to getting us through to the other side of this.
We'll still be working on schedules. There's a bunch of things where the facts just aren't all there yet. Those need to be polished up. That work will continue even after the final draft is issued. And it's not inconceivable that someone's going to read the third and final draft and come up with something. We just thought of yet. Address that. And the bond council are still working. Contingencies. Last but not least, some people are still on the fence. So they're out. Get that.
And we're going to necessitate a decision in November. So that's kind of.
Thank you, Brett.
My pleasure. Journey. But it's been interesting. Thank you to all the board members who've seen this journey through. Could have done it without the leadership folks.
It's not done yet.
And staff, many hours of staff. State.
I do appreciate that added clause on the reimbursement, because that was a question I asked you a long time ago. How much have we spent trying to figure this out?
It's meaningful, a meaningful amount. And I think it's important to note, and everyone recognizes it in all the communities that are involved, that Rick has really done the yeoman's work on this agreement. I mean, this is his work product, which gives me great comfort, and frankly, that he has done a lot of work. But, you know, Amy Beatty, also representing Urbandale and West Des Moines, has been elbow deep in this thing too. So I think that's all very positive, and whether it's proposed to be reimbursement for those costs.
Any other comments on the regionalization effort? I don't have the agenda in front of me, but I imagine it's CEO general comments from here.
Yeah, and I'm gonna keep that really short. You're all aware that the river is low. There was an interesting article in the paper, AP article this week about data centers, AI, their water use. I will just say that while we don't have those facilities in our immediate retail distribution system, we haven't seen the kind of water use that they described in the article. We're certainly keeping an eye on that. I think it needs to be a consideration as we go forward and more of them are constructed. The other thing I will share is that we here at the Des Moines Waterworks are seeing a little bit of a COVID spike. Have had groups of people.
You're like, as you're
Yeah,
coughing, right?
Yeah, I have no other symptoms. I can't say I don't have any. And we're monitoring that. It's been a long time since we've had any issue with that, but now we have a group of people in the plant. That work together. We're 5 or 6 out. 6 people out. This week, so it's not gone. We're keeping an eye on it, and we're managing this one.
Booster is out next week.
Is that true?
That's right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Do I need a formal motion to adjourn, or is
If
it
you need one, I'm so moved.
all right?